what do you see 2020 and beyond for the city? What are you excited about? And what are you going to be doing beyond being the mayor of this great city?
We want to stay in Spokane, and so we're looking for opportunities that allow us to do that. I got 3 great kids. I wasn't the mayor for 8 years to move to another city.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ben and Sway Show. We've got a special guest today. Current mayor of Spokane, David Condon. Not for long. He's in his last term and finished at the end of the year. So there's lots of things happening and being talked about in the city. But I'd like to give you a few moments to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into talking about the city of Spokane, some of the cool stuff going on here.
Well, sure. You know, the last 7+ years have been the mayor of Spokane. Before that, I worked at the federal level in senior staff in a congressional office. I also was in the Army for a period of time, about 8+ years.
Yeah.
But grew up in a family here in Eastern Washington, big family, Irish Catholic family, so I'm the youngest of 9, and everybody owns their own businesses, so grew up in small business. I actually started my first small business when I was in college. Here we are drinking coffee, but believe it or not, Starbucks was not in Boston in 1993 and 4, and so I had a little coffee stand, and we ended up having 3 or 4 of them. And so learned a lot there, but I had grown up, selling Christmas trees as a kid. My dad probably lasted for about 30 years, a Christmas tree retail business in parking lots, and so did that as a kid, and then started that company. And so it's been interesting. As you bring kind of that to the table, and then also working in the federal government, both in the Department of Defense and then in Congress. But at the time, it was 7 years ago. I was 36-ish, 7, and I really wanted to focus on the city I grew up in, and seeing what you could do. And so it's been a blast over the last 7 years of really being able to have an impact on where I plan on living the rest of my life.
And I think regardless of somebody's viewpoint politically, they can't argue the dedication and the hard work that you put in. I've witnessed a lot of the work that you do here, and I think it's appreciated. And I think that's all we can ask for politicians. And you and I have interacted with a number of politicians at different levels, and I appreciate Republicans and Democrats that engage and listen and start a dialogue, because there are those that don't. And so you're one of those that, regardless of the letter behind your name, you work hard and you're dedicated to the people you serve. So I appreciate that. And I think that's a lot of what we talk about on the Ben and Sway Show is Spokane and the environment that's created now, in particular for entrepreneurialism. We're seeing a lot of companies come here. We're seeing a lot of startups.
Here. Yeah, totally.
Charlie Wolf in your office has been really instrumental in sharing some of those stories with startups that may never even thought of Spokane about how cost effective it is to come here. You've got some really cool things going on in the West Plains. Why don't you talk a little bit from that standpoint about what's going on in Spokane and the Inland Northwest? Because Spokane, and you recognize this, is not just Spokane, it's a hub for a geographic area.
It is, and so let's start first, which is, as we look at the startups, even in the, it has just been dramatic in the last 6 to 7 years, and part of that, maybe goes back to your first comments about, the passion and the work we do. Often people talk about the work-life balance. I call it the work-life integration. And the cool thing about kind of the Northwest culture is that people want to integrate, what they do for a living and what they do to earn a paycheck with how they want to live. And you see that passion, over and over again. And yes, it's work, but it's work worth doing. And it's having an impact, and so that's pretty cool, and I think we're all part of that culture. I remember when I went to school in Boston, it was that, people, I started my coffee company, and, for many of the people that I was going to school with, the big five accounting firms were in Boston. I was a finance major, so, my, friends all went to New York. But this idea that I would start a company, they thought I was nuts. I'd wake up in the morning, drive into downtown Boston. We didn't have Costco then. We then got a Costco. So I say all this it really is our culture, and I think that's what lays the groundwork for our startup culture, and people are realizing what that is.
Just real quickly, to touch on that, entrepreneurialism wasn't always cool.
No.
In that time, and you and I both know this, that going and starting a business was considered crazy and risky, and don't do it. And now, I think you see, whether you're looking at social media or whatever else is going on, entrepreneurialism, it's come a long way. People are starting businesses, and you're talking about that. I think it's also become kind of cool and chic, and there may be some people starting businesses that shouldn't. But
I think people want to have an impact, and what you do have with entrepreneurialism and startups is it's passion based, and people get together, and it's part of the environment, and so that's really then leads into what the city's strategy is really to focus in some key areas. And so you talked about the West Plains. And so how do we do that? We created public development authorities, and what's really exciting, there's 3 major ones, but the one in the West Plains is done jointly with the county. And so we really broke down, it's the only one in the state where we broke down the political boundaries, meaning that this street is the end of the city and it begins the county. We kind of took an economic footprint and said, where generally will companies generally be? And we drew that line, because ultimately we had to. And then we said, you know what, if there's growth in this area, 75% of the tax growth, property taxes, and that's what we'll put into the pool, and it'll be spent in that area to grow that environment. And then it's run by a board of directors that's made up of the county, the city, and then also private sector folks to really, and they're just really selfish to that area. They want to make sure that it has the right infrastructure. They want to make sure they attract the right companies. And so we have one there. We have the University District, which is another great public development authority and major investments there. And we also have out in Northeast Spokane, the Northeast Public Development Authority, and all 3 of those are built around major public investments. You have the airport, probably one of the most valued valued assets in this area. In the University District, you have all of the investment in the university, nearing $1 billion now.
That's incredible.
And now we have $1 billion north-south freeway going in. And so it makes sense that then how do we spur the private investment around that? And so it's exciting to see, but our strategy is really those targeted areas. Also targeted investments. Where are we making the infrastructure investments? And what's exciting, you just talked about other levels of government, is as we bring these ideas to the federal and state, they're like, this totally makes sense. And you're seeing major grants, like out on the West Plains, a major grant from the federal DOT. At the state level is the majority of the $1 billion going into the north-south freeway. And so they're sitting there looking at this going, this makes sense. So we have targeted investments. And then we are also looking at targeted industries. And that's what's exciting. And where do we have a bench of different companies that people know us about, but then also have a future? And I hope we talk about mass timber and some of the things you're involved in, because it's based off of 100+ year industry in forestry and forestry products. But it's the future of that industry. So we aren't just trying to go after the latest fad. We have a bench of knowledge, whether it be through our universities, whether it be legacy companies, but we also have the future and what that's happening. And so we have that in forestry and forestry products. We have that in energy. I mean, and what we, both on hydropower and clean energy, and what we're doing in that sector. And then we also have it in some key areas in the life sciences. And so you look at these, it's not, what I hate seeing in mayors, unfortunately I see this, what's the latest trend? Let's go run after it. And you may or may not have it. You talked about companies coming here. There is a significant value proposition on the financial side. I would suggest there's a larger value proposition on our talent that we have in this area and who we can attract to this area. Our fastest growing age group now is 20s to early 30s, because they, and people are, with unemployment rates at all-time lows, companies are looking at where do people want to go. And in the old days where people used to go to where the companies are, they're dramatically shifting where companies are going where people want to live. Back to this idea of integration of your lifestyle with what you do as a job.
If you're a four-season person, Spokane's hard to beat.
Absolutely.
You know, because you're right on the edge of agriculture and the mountains and forestry and all those things. So you brought up mass timber. Let's shift to something you and I did together. You had put together this Sustainable Cities tour where we went to Copenhagen. We really did a deep dive into what's going on in Copenhagen. Lots of amazing stuff there. Interesting stuff, some of which we can bring home, some of which will take a lot more time to integrate and bring our kind of flavor to it. But then we did another trip to Sweden and we saw some of the mass timber stuff there. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into what's going on here. And I think the key part to that is we went to Växjö, Sweden. I don't know how it's pronounced that way. There's an X and a J in there, but whatever. But it's considered the greenest city in Europe. And you get there, it's totally, you would expect, if that were told to you here, that okay, that is a super left-leaning Eugene, Oregon type, you know, that kind of mix. That's what I would have thought. What was really striking to me was how they were passionate about the amount of carbon that they had cut from their emissions, but they were equally as passionate about how much improvement the business saw in revenue. They say turnover in Europe, but in revenue. And people were coming there, and it was a great place to live. And then they talked about the modern wooden city. And we got to see some of that in the pouring rain, which was a little difficult. But I just thought, and then the key thing that was really interesting to me was seeing all the things that Spokane has already started and has been doing that actually mirrored a lot of what we saw.
Well, and that's what I say. You know, you've got to, as you grow, you've got to go where we have that base of knowledge and already have innovated for decades, right? And you see any of our growth in this area has been in areas that we've had long time innovations in. So in this area, that's why, you know, as we went there was a lot to understand, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it was affirmation of what we're already doing, but we had not put the pieces together. And so I think there's a key one. You started with this, which is, you know, carbon reduction. And I think if you look at that, especially in today's discussion of the green economy, I think many of us can agree that reduction in carbon is critical. But then you have to be honest about what's going to do that. So, you know, at the city of Spokane, we believe, is the only city, definitely in the United States, that produces more green energy than we use in all energy types. But we've been able to further that because, of course, the city owns a hydroelectric dam and we also own a waste energy plant. Environmentally speaking, in the environmental throes, waste energy is not seen as a viable green energy source in the United States. Yet there, it is seen as the answer.
It's incredible.
You know, they even have the fourth R. You know, of course, we all want to reduce, right? We all want to recycle. We all want to reuse or reuse before recycle. But they all add that fourth R, which is resource. They see it as a resource. And so if the goal is carbon reduction, we've got to be honest about, as we look to recycle, were we truly reducing carbon when we were shipping our recycles, you know, halfway across the world? Maybe we are. In some cases, that might be the case. You know, to be honest with you, you know, many of these ships were going back to China and other places empty. And so, but we've got to be honest to where that is. Or we've also got to be cognizant of getting to that path. So at the city, we converted a substantial amount of our garbage fleet. We pick up our garbage to natural gas. It's not seen as it's still seen as a fossil fuel, but our carbon reduction by doing that was dramatic. Will there be an electric garbage truck? Perhaps there will, but how was that energy, the electricity for that garbage truck created? And so we have to look at that, you know, the total life cycle of it. And if there was something to be learned as we were in Sweden and in Denmark, was because of a very, you know, vertically integrated government, they're able to stack this up, and the integration is much more. And they really were looking at that. They were honestly looking at the life cycle carbon production. And that's why in their case, you know, we stood on the roof of, I believe it's the largest waste energy plant in the world. If not, it was very large. It had a ski hill on the top. Large
enough to build a ski hill on it.
You know, so, you know, it puts Spokane's, you know, in the small category. But, you know, and that was a recent investment of theirs in the hundreds of millions. millions. I forget
Yeah.
what the number was. But they saw this, and rather than shipping, their commodities, plastic, paper, cardboard, to somewhere else, they were burning that and
Yeah.
using it as that fourth R, the resource.
Yeah.
And so that's, those things, I think, as we take an honest opinion of looking at that, being on the spectrum to a green economy. Because my other worry is, and we've really focused on this at the city, is what's the cost to the citizen?
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that that people shouldn't pay to make sure that we're more environmentally sustainable, but we do need to take that into consideration of
Yeah.
at what cost.
I wrote a blog post for the Forest blog when I was blogging regularly called Climate Change Theory. And my point wasn't that I'm a climate change denier, but you can't short circuit the scientific process. We are still in a theory stage of information collection. The public has jumped on board and said, hey, we think that this
Absolutely.
is human cause. And
Yeah.
I think, regardless of your opinion on that, what I think we're missing, and missing a huge opportunity on, is whether you believe it or not, we can all agree that pollution is a bad thing.
Absolutely.
And we're old enough to know that the cities have changed dramatically. Smog was a real thing for a long time. I
Yeah.
mean, LA was just disgusting to fly into when I was a young child.
Spokane used to have those issues.
It did.
We had,
Seattle,
yeah.
and it's changed dramatically. We've improved a lot. Those things are important. I always tell people that are, say, climate change is bogus and all that stuff, or somebody that goes way over the top. I said, well, what if somebody who disagrees wholeheartedly with you, but agrees that we should do the same thing, and we can figure out who was right later?
Yeah.
And there aren't enough of those discussions. I think mass timber is one of those. And so we're out there now, instead of just sustainably harvesting timber and replanting, because people always want to talk about that. And I got approached by somebody who said, well, if you're doing mass timber buildings, you should figure out how many trees you're going to replant when you build those buildings. Fantastic idea on its face. But what people don't see is what we're doing up north. As you know, you've been up there. We're going out to the forest. We're working with like Mike Peterson at the Lands Council and the Nature Conservancy and these other big name environmental groups. And we are thinning the forest based on what we want the forest to look like, to get to a natural state of resiliency, using the byproduct to go to the mill and then to make mass timber out of. It's a totally different equation when it comes to carbon, because we're taking that carbon that would have been smoke that we're all breathing. That's the first thing we talked about before we got on the camera today, is that we don't have smoke right now in late July, which is a beautiful thing. What we need to do is when we do have a dry and hot July, have forests that can withstand what would have been natural wildfire in the past. And how do we do that? We thin the forest. Now with technology, we're able to do with what we saw in Europe, make cross-laminated timber and glue-laminated beams and build incredible, high-quality,
multi-story,
buildings,
resilient, fireproof, everything.
Stores that carbon in there that may have otherwise gone up in a wildfire, and we left the forest in a better condition than we found it.
And that's what I think is exciting, because, of course, as we sit in this space and we see the large timbers, that this is an area that we have an amazing history of innovations, actually, and Boggin Brothers was an innovator in small diameter, harvesting, and now this just takes it to that, that next level. But it's based on a core competence that this community has, and not only that, but produces high-paying jobs, great jobs, careers for folks, but is on the leading edge of those industries. And so,
I think Spokane can benefit from that and will.
And I think it's a way that it connects, and especially in today's environment of the urban areas being disconnected from
rural divide.
And this connects it,
Absolutely.
instantaneously. I mean, I have a thought as we put in that north-south corridor, that the reality is that you will see stuff like there has been for generations coming, into the city, east and west on I-90, whether it be on I-90 or on our rail system, but literally continuing down that path, but on that leading edge, that leading, that ability of connecting that, because what makes America great is those rural communities. That's what in the mid-sized communities, and and when you have the mid-sized communities, they support, and vice versa, the rural communities support the mid-sized cities.
I think that politically, I've always seen politics as a bell curve, and when I was in high school, I remember when I first really dug into it, The bell curve's in the middle, and then people go right or left of that. And usually the politician that wins is the one that can speak to enough on the other side to pull it in. The problem that's always been, and I think even more so with our social media culture today, and people being able to say and interact with people they didn't in the past, is the extremes on those are what's creating the attention. That's the squeaky wheel. And it's sometimes really unfortunate because we spend energy talking about things that really they shouldn't be high on the priority for certain areas. Maybe they are in others, but I think that some of the stuff that you've been leading in the city here, I mean, you're a Republican mayor, that's not a secret, but you've been leading on sustainability. We've talked about that here, and I think that partly goes into, I think we're both Gen Xers, but we kind of straddle that baby boomer to the millennial and soon the global.
Well, people
age.
want to. I mean, I think universally people want to see results, and so unfortunately, as you and maybe in some circumstances you see that when you get on that outside of that that pendulum or that bell curve that you spoke about, but more realistically, staying true to your philosophies, where are projects? Like I said, even on the issue of sustainability, there is little to no debate on doing things more efficiently, using technology to reduce smog. No one likes they often talk about the fifth season, the new fire smoke season, which is it shouldn't be but you need to then look at what are those causes, what are the root cause analysis, and what is the logical step to get to a solution. Like I said, is we at the city looked at, the ultimate goal is really carbon reduction, no matter who you are, and we don't want smog. So if natural gas gets us closer to that, that's great. 10, 15 years from now, as we do the fleet transition that we typically do, are we ultimately going to get to electric there? But then also, where's that electric being generated? And so as we do this, you need to allow us to have incremental benefit, rather than really this black and white situation. And as our trip to Scandinavia showed, they see that. They see that long-term benefit. They don't have to have instant payback on certain things, or they also see that this is an increment to the right thing. Sure, would they like not to gain their resources through waste energy? Perhaps. But then, especially for some of those smaller countries that don't have fossil fuels, they'd be importing, a fossil fuel, and coal or diesel or whatever they're.
And you're incentivizing financially, who knows what, wherever it comes from.
Where who you're buying.
It may or may not meet your interests and values.
And we're all interconnected. I mean, and that's I haven't traveled extensively in Europe by any means, but if there's often their scope is much longer just because of the age of the European continent. But then also their requirement to work with each other quite dramatically, country to country, with maybe totally different forms of government, but and in their borders, their countries are the size of some of our smallest states in the United States, and so as we do this, and that's back to the city, what we've attempted to do, and I've often talked about it, but as our strategic plan at the city, that amongst 8 elected officials, we agreed on one vision. We didn't go and change our mission and our values; those all stay pretty consistent, best as a city government. But as a city, we agreed and debated, like you often do when you look at a vision. And are we going towards that vision? And then we have a list of projects, programs, and initiatives. And if they're strategic, they're probably going to be controversial. If they didn't, we would have already gotten it done. So we've been having really, people are like, well, there seems to be a lot of debate, and these are tough things. And and the big issue is what you talked about earlier, which is this is educating. And educating your citizens that are very busy. And how do you engage them? Not only do you have to educate them so that they have a base level of knowledge, but now they have to start having an opinion. So now you have to actually engage them. And that's where I get excited about Spokane. The last 8 years have been pretty amazing of what we've been able to do. And I have the rare opportunity to represent the city, or the humbling opportunity to represent the city multitude times. And people are looking at Spokane over and over again about how we're able to bring these things together. And and how do we accomplish things very large? But you know what? It is in our DNA. I mean, it is Spokane who, is, if you look, at the turn of the century, what we did with the rail infrastructure all comes to Spokane. I mean, it's pretty amazing what we did in the late '60s in bringing the World's Fair to Spokane, smallest city to ever do that. And now we're one of the smallest cities that is actually, cleaning up the Spokane River. Other communities can't even get their arms around how to address it. How are we bringing, I'm presenting next week in Pittsburgh on a infrastructure summit about how we've linked all of the construction in our streets so that we're only working on the streets at one time. So water, sewer, fiber. And then, of course, the all-important surface, the street. But so it's pretty exciting, and that's what's so cool about Spokane is, the size we are. People know each other. People know each other in Colville and Deer Park, and how do you bring these things together? And that's going to stay. That's who we are. That is in our DNA. But we've got to leverage it, and I think for a long time we haven't. We were always looking somewhere else.
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned through our environmental forest collaboration is to focus on our interests rather than our positions, and to look at things in terms of abundance rather than scarcity. Everybody wants their piece of the pie. Well, what if there's layers of those pies? And I think that's something that we've seen in Spokane, and it's benefited from that. Let's start to wrap things up here. One of the things that we talk about at Bend and Sway, and one of the things that you're adept at, is using social media to tell the story, and it's a new medium. And historically in politics, it was put out a press release, get to the paper, get on TV, that kind of thing. But people are consuming things on the screen still. It's just a handheld screen in front of them more and more. And especially as you talk about the age group demographic that's growing in Spokane, they're connected wirelessly by devices. They're not sitting in front of a TV. They're not doing the same things, watching the evening news. So we have to reach them differently. And as we do that, we learn that they react differently to different stories. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think and we've really focused this at the city, it's, at the core, you want engagement, right? And so how do you get that engagement? And there's still a place for traditional media that garners that engagement. And I would suggest, perhaps, and I don't know the statistics on this, it's all anecdotal, but, yes, the younger generations may be more adept. But more and more, I find the citizens in Spokane that are in the older age groups are also engaging because the technology is much more intuitive. And so they're watching on their tablet or their smartphone.
They're forwarding you a newspaper story.
Yes, exactly.
Online.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's to me, I've always strived and struggled and recommitted ourselves to how do you get that engagement. And back to what you said, look at what our interests are. And no matter where you are on something or where a politician may be different from another, we both want engagement. I mean, what you don't want is apathy, especially as you're building a culture of a city. And it's this ability to engage the citizen, get them, and I'll tell you, have a much healthier city if that's the case. And people want to be engaged. And I hear this all the time in Spokane. It's just big enough to have a lot of features of larger cities, whether it be the sports and the entertainment and that sort of thing. But it's small enough to where you can sit down and actually have a conversation and also have an impact on your community. And I would suggest that is what the next generation, as we look at attracting companies, and the companies are going after that talent. A lot of the next generation of workers in the workforce want to see what the impact of their company is, and they want to be a part of that impact. For several years now, we launched a volunteer initiative every April. It's called Spokane Gives. This last year, over 25,000 people gave over 100,000 hours of service. People want, and we now have companies saying we want to be part of this, and not only that, we're committed to a certain amount of hours of our employees. Why? Because they're reacting to what their talent wants, and their talent wants to be part of those teams.
Yeah, and it feels good to do that. So where can people find out more information about the city and some of the stuff you're working on? You're on different social media.
Yep, we absolutely are. It's SpokaneCity.org. Our all of our strategic programming that we're doing. That's here in the paper version, but more importantly, the strategic plan is called One Spokane. So you can follow that on Twitter and Facebook and see kind of the updates in some of these key areas,
Yeah.
whether you're interested in economic development, whether you're interested in public safety, whether you're interested in infrastructure. Those are kind of the three major areas that we focus on. And it's pretty exciting to see those projects and get engaged. And some of these issues you're going to have an opinion on, and they're controversial, but that's where the engagement happens.
So we're once we close out 2019, very significant change in your life, because you'll no longer be the mayor of Spokane. So two things: what do you see 2020 and beyond for the city? What are you excited about? And what are you going to be doing beyond being the mayor of this great city?
Well, personally, my family, we want to stay in Spokane, and so we're looking for opportunities that allow us to do that. I got 3 great kids. I wasn't the mayor for 8 years to move to another city. So we're starting to look at that as we, get here over the next several months. For the city, what I really get excited about is, because of the strategic plan, it really, those projects, initiatives, and programs will continue. And we've really been working with the community about this, about being a safer, smarter, healthier community. And that's what's excited. Yes, a new administration, and yes, other council members will have their influence, and rightfully should. And maybe bring new, programs and initiatives to the table. But they're generally going to be about making our community safer. They're about making us healthier, and they are making us smarter. And so what are those things that drive that forward? Because as we started with Vision 2020, we were looking at this time, and we talked about being the city of choice. And maybe that sounds trite, but today people have a choice. And what's exciting is seeing more and more people are choosing Spokane either to stay here or they're coming here. And we also decided that if you're going to be a viable city, you have to be growing. You cannot go the other direction. And over again, unfortunately, we were seeing the city go down. And just recently, we even saw, that one of our outcomes and one of our strategic outcomes is increased property values, which is the outcome of people wanting to be here. Front page of our local paper, there it was, which was, here's these zip codes, which are seen, and some of those have been in traditional inner city neighborhoods that were not viable. But a major investment in our public schools, where now the school, people want to get our kids, our portfolio system where kids can choose whether they want to go to North Central to be in the lab sciences, or whether you want to go to one of our 3 charter schools. People want that choice. And if you want to have full immersion into Spanish K5, you can do that. You can be in the gifted programs, you can do On-Track Academy, you can do virtual learning, and people and families are attracted to that. Everybody learns differently, and I'll tell you, the quickest way to grow a city is to have a world-class education, and we have that. Not only K-12, but the universities, the medical schools, all the different universities we have here, and so that's exciting. Not only that, but it really plays. People want to be lifelong learners. The idea that you don't constantly learn, this is something people seek. So I get excited about it, as you can tell, about us going forward, and I am, and that's why I'm choosing to stay here.
No, I'm excited about it too. Well, let's wrap up this show.
This has been great.
Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks for sharing your passion for the city with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing this.